Tragedy turned to controversy later that year when NASCAR suffered its first labor crisis.
Turner and Weatherly and Bruton were in trouble with Charlotte Motor Speedway. They had to repave it, so they got in a lot of financial troubles. And I guess Turner was going to borrow money from the Teamsters to get the Speedway out of hock. And I guess this is everything, you know, the word that went around. And in order for the Teamsters to loan them money, they wanted to organize the race drivers into the union.
For Turner, the timing seemed right. While the sport was expanding, even some of the better drivers struggled to make meal money.
Of course, we always wanted to have increased prize money and better conditions to race under, but Bill France and his group were doing the best they could. Sometimes we couldn't see that from our side of the sport, but we were looking for improvements.
Turner gained the support of some of the top drivers, including Joe Weatherly, Fireball Roberts, and Tim Flock. Bill France was furious. He quickly called an emergency meeting with the drivers.
And he was serious about he was going to protect NASCAR any way he had to. And that anybody who wanted to run this race could, anybody that didn't could leave, but there's going to be no Teamsters involved in it.
France was clear. No Teamster would ever race in his NASCAR. Most of the union supporters backed down, leaving only Turner and Flock to face France's wrath. Big Bill moved swiftly and banned the two drivers for life. Two of NASCAR's finest were gone.
I think that's one reason that NASCAR has grown as much as it has over the years and has built the respect that it has, is because that France chose to run the thing himself. We've seen other racing organizations that are run by committees, and they just don't get along as well and don't grow as well as NASCAR has.
As the old veterans fell off the pace, younger drivers took their place up front. Lee Petty won his third NASCAR championship in 1959. His son Richard almost won his first in 1960, coming in a close second to Rex White. Then after Lee's crash, Richard was forced to take the reins at the Petty stable.
I was like 23 years old. My mother and father had always run the business. Daddy did the engineer and told us what to do on the cars. Mother took care of all the bills and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, my brother and myself were put into the situation of running Petty Enterprises and looking after the Petty family.
But the young Petty wasn't the only newcomer on the tracks. Another second-generation driver, Buddy Baker, began trying his hand, as did Fred Lorenzen, David Pearson, and Nelson Stacy. In '61, Stacy shocked the veterans by winning the Southern 500 in only his 13th race. But it was another young driver who would be the real surprise of 1961. In only his third season, Ned Jarrett won the NASCAR championship. Banking on consistency, he finished in the top 10 in 34 of 46 races.
I think the key to the success in winning the championship in 1961 was my style of driving and not punishing the car so much that we were sitting on the sidelines too much at the end of the race. You know, the point system today rewards consistency. I would say that the point system that was in effect back in those days rewarded consistency even more, because I only won one race in winning the championship in 1961. That's not the way I wanted to do it, and I vowed to myself that I would win it again and would win more races and feel better about it.
Jarrett got his chance to feel better in 1965. This time he won 13 races and his second Grand National Championship.
We had been with Ford, 1965 was our third year with them, and had helped to develop some of the things that would help to make better race cars out of them, and as a result we continued to have more confidence in driving harder, and of course we had associated ourselves at that time with Bon DeLong in Camden, South Carolina, and we had put together a good team, a good group of people who had experience, knew what it took to run up front and also to win the championship.
It was also in 1965 at Darlington that Ned learned never to doubt a preacher's premonition.
I was standing in the pits at Darlington going over the strategy of the race with the crew, and a gentleman walked up and introduced himself as a minister from Orangeburg, South Carolina, and he said, "Ned," he said, "I got a very special feeling that you're going to win this race today," and he said, "I want you to know that." And he said, "I also want you to know that 2 years ago," said, "I had this very same feeling." And he said, "I went up to Fireball Roberts and told him the same thing that I'm telling you before the race, and sure enough, Fireball won that race."
Early in the race, many of the top competitors were taken out by accidents, like this one that sent Cale Yarborough sailing over the guardrail. Late in the race, Jarrett's car had overheating problems. Ned was third, well behind Fred Lorenzen and Darrell Derringer. Miraculously, within 6 laps, both their cars had mechanical problems. Ned nursed his Ford through the remaining miles to win the Southern 500.
That was one of the races that I had set a goal to win. It was the oldest 500-mile stock car race, and I still believe is run on the toughest track there is, and it gives you a great feeling of accomplishment to win there.
Ned Jarrett's career moved faster than his number 11 Ford. It started when he decided to buy one of Junior Johnson's used race cars with a bad check.
They wanted $2,000 for it, and there was a race at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina on Saturday night, and one at Charlotte at an old fairgrounds track, a half-mile dirt track, on Sunday afternoon. And each of those races paid $950. And I said, "I'll go win both of those races, and that's $1,900, and I can scrape up that other 100 before the bank opens on Monday morning." Well, they laughed, but I was serious.
Always a believer, Jarrett did just that. He won the 100-miler at Myrtle Beach despite getting severe cuts on his hands from a bad steering wheel. Then he worked all night to prepare for the next race, leaving him in no shape to drive.
We got in the race at Charlotte, and I was running along in 4th place, and everything was looking good. But fortunately, Junior Johnson was driving Wood Brothers' car, and he had a problem with it. And the caution came out, so I wheeled in and got Junior behind the wheel of my car, and he went on and won the race. So we did have the $1,900 at the end to cover the check. So that's really how I got into Grand National Racing.
Before his sudden retirement in 1966, Ned Jarrett had raced in 352 Grand National events. He won 50 of them, the same number as his friend and arch rival, Junior Johnson. Along with the Superspeedways, another big change came to NASCAR in the early 60s, open factory sponsorship.
The fans came as much to watch the brand of car as they did the driver, because I know up where I lived in the Carolinas, you didn't hear somebody say, "Old David Pearson's going to take that, go out and wear out Richard Petty or whatever." It was, Pearson will take that old Ford or Pontiac or whatever he's running, and he'll whip that Plymouth or Dodge that Richard Petty's driving.
When it went over, when it started getting publicity, when it started getting pictures in the paper, when it started making headlines in some sports section, then you saw the factory say, "Look, we should look into that. We should see what's going on."
Feeling that involvement in such a reckless and dangerous sport made for bad press, the American manufacturers had jointly agreed to get out of racing in 1957. The fact is, their support simply moved underground. They continued to quietly funnel parts and know-how to the top teams. Then in 1962, Ford announced it was breaking the silence.
They announced that they were going to have 4 teams starting in 1963, and I was flattered that they came to me to be one of those 4 teams, and that they would offer the technical assistance and some money. Then it was $2,000 per race for any event that was 250 miles or longer. There were 17 of those events back then, so we had $34,000 in cash. That was our sponsorship money, plus the cars and the parts that Ford Motor Company would offer.
Those parts for the factory Ford teams made their first stop at the shops of Holman Moody in Charlotte, North Carolina. No one was better at turning a stock car into a race car.
Back then, you were just about running stock cars. And that's what happened in Holman Moody. Me, mostly myself, come up with all the stuff for the spindle and steering linkage and, heavy-duty stuff so somebody didn't get hurt. So it just didn't break. And to start with, they quite didn't want to go along with that because they were running stock cars. But finally, we got them to see, the stock cars are fine. When you keep breaking them all day, by and by, you don't have a show, half the field's gone.
Ford's leap back in the racing game paid off immediately. Ford won 23 races in 1963 compared with only 6 the year before. Their star player was Holman Moody's new golden boy, Fred Lorenzen.
He was one of those guys you just had to keep cool down all the time. He used to get mad at me all the time. I give him hell about something, you know. When he stopped and give him a drink of water and tell him what he's doing wrong or something, and he'd get mad, throw the water at you, and all upset, you know.
Nothing could cool down Freddie Lorenzen in 1963. He finished in the top 5 in 21 races and won 6 of them. He became the first driver ever to win more than $100,000 in a single season. What's more impressive, he did it in only 29 starts, as Ford didn't sponsor him in the short 100-mile events.
Fred Lorenzen, to make a long story short, was probably one of the most nervous racers I've ever known, or been around, or been close to. But I had a heart bigger than an automobile. He was all heart, all serious, and smart.
A former USAC champion, Lorenzen moved south in 1960 and within a year had landed the Holman Moody ride. Despite their frequent disagreements, he credits much of his early success to Moody, including his first big win in 1961 at Darlington.
He kept trying to pass Turner down, and he couldn't get by after Turner shut him off up in a wall. And I'd already bugged him about that, you know. You just keep playing like a dumb kid going up there, and he'll shut you off. And when there's a lap or something, 2 to go, just pull that stuff when he moves up, dive underneath him, and move him out of there. And he did that, and Turner was so mad that after Freddie won the race, he went over and ran him in the back stretch.
Ford's domination on the Superspeedways didn't go unnoticed in the Chrysler camp. Engineers worked overtime. The result was an updated version of the hemispherical combustion engine, the Hemi.
Even though I'd finished some pretty good races at Daytona, it was strictly from the drafting standpoint. You go to the other races, then you didn't have the power to really run good. Short tracks, you just out-handle the cars, and you was able to win some races. But when we got the Hemi in '64 and went to Daytona, then, you know, right off the bat, we was as fast as anybody had ever been.
Petty dominated the 500 for his first Superspeedway win. Plymouths took the first 3 spots, and the factory car wars were on. Petty would ride his Hemi to 8 more wins and his first Grand National Championship.
We had more experience with the Chrysler cars than anybody had up to that time. There was a lot of people jumped on, wanted to have the Hemis and went into the Chrysler business because they knew there was good race cars, but they didn't have the experience of working on the cars and working on the chassis and stuff.